What's up guys, Ivan Carranza here and welcome to Bass Tone Tuesday. Today we're going to talk about pre or post EQ settings when playing live with PA support. And the idea for this video came from a question from a user, but I also get asked this pretty frequently. What is best to use when playing live? Should I send the PA a clean pre-EQ signal or use my post-EQ on my pedals or my amp? What is the best way to go? First, we're going to talk about why is it that sound engineers prefer having a pre-EQ signal. Because I'm sure if you have 10 engineers and you ask them what do they prefer, the majority is probably going to say, please just send me a pre-EQ signal. And here is the reason why, or most likely why. If you're playing on stage and you have your amp and you're taking the DI signal from there and you send a post EQ signal, the engineer and the PA is gonna receive your sound with the EQ settings that you did on your amp. So you adjust it so that you can hear yourself on stage well and make the band sound good on stage. But that won't necessarily translate the way you want it to for the entire room and for the audience, because the room where the audience is a different or has different dimensions than the stage. It's gonna be much louder as well, and you don't hear what the people in front of you hear. So if you do too many EQ moves on your amp, too much bass, too much treble, or you cut too many mids, or you cut some bass because the stage is too boomy, that won't translate exactly as you want it to for the audience, which is why the engineers like having a neutral bass sound so that they can adjust, filter, notch, boost, whatever it is that they need to do to make the bass fit the mix for the room, not for the stage, for the room, because that's what matters, what the audience hears. And some rooms are more boomy than others, some have a resonant frequency that makes the bass sound like whoop whenever you play certain notes, so they need to notch that. There's different things that they might need to compress more or less. So different engineers also work a bit differently, so they prefer to low cut at different points or high cut at different points. But what matters is that what you EQ on stage won't translate the same way for the audience. So that's why they prefer having a pre-EQ signal. So whether you send a pre or post EQ signal, to me, depends on what kind of scenario you are. And to me, there's two main areas, I would say. Area number one is that you're a working musician and you play, for example, in corporate events, weddings, galas, you're in a cover or function band, whatever you want to call it. And you play a lot of covers and music by other people that's in the top 40, let's say. And the other area would be you play either with your band playing original music, or you're a working musician playing as a sideman for an artist that is still playing original music. You can divide it into those two areas. Now for scenario number one, the cover gigs, the gala bands, wedding gigs, function bands, etc., you as a bass player need to cover a lot of ground. Style-wise, you need to play maybe some funk, some pop, some rock, maybe some electronic music here and there. So you need to morph your playing quite a bit. To me, in those scenarios, rule number one, if you need to adjust your sound to fit a different genre, the first thing that needs to change is your technique. That is the starting point, not how much bass you boost on a pedal or how much EQ moves you do in a preamp. Technique first, and the rest comes later. Because you can dial in a very good and consistent all-around sound and play an entire gig covering different styles, just adjusting your technique. And for example, Lee Sklar, this is something that he recommends to do. Just one setting, adjust your technique to make the changes for the different styles. One big advantage to doing this, adjusting with technique first and then worrying about preamps, pedals, etc., is that you have one consistent solid signal throughout the whole gig which means that the person in the front of house is going to receive the same type of sound throughout the whole song and throughout the whole set as well, so that he or she can make the adjustments without worrying about having, spikes and loudness, or maybe you kick on a pedal and the bass sits in a completely different frequency. So by adjusting only with your technique at first, you're making sure that the bass overall stays fairly consistent. Now, of course, if you're jumping for example, from a fingerstyle funk song to, let's say, Killing in the Name of Rage Against the Machine, which has happened to me, maybe you do want to kick in maybe a slight overdrive pedal or some distortion in there, or EQ the bass slightly different for that type of music. Of course you can do that, but here's where the debate comes. Should I be sending a pre-EQ signal or a post-EQ signal? I believe that for those scenarios where you're playing in a function cover band, you can definitely play an entire set with a pre-EQ signal. Like I said, just adjusting your technique, that's definitely gonna work. If, however, you wanna use a post-EQ signal because you are kicking in some distortion pedals, some compression, some chorus maybe here and there, or an envelope filter, and you want that to translate to front of house, of course, then you need to send a post-EQ signal. You have to. There's no other way. And in those cases, I personally prefer to go with, I would say, a conservative EQ style of adjustments. If we take a look at, let's say, this preamp as an example, right? I have everything pretty much at 12 o'clock. There we go. So if this was my amp, for example, for the bass, I would probably just go like this. Maybe a tiny bit more. That's the most I probably would adjust. And then the treble pretty much the same, just a little bit here and there, just to add some more sparkle, and the bass boost just to make things a bit more warmer. But I wouldn't go anything like, like this or like this. Of course, different amps and different pedals adjust your EQ differently. They have different curves, and the way the bass reacts is gonna change. So when you come to a gig and you're setting up before soundcheck and you do your EQs for the band, I would start with small adjustments and then play and then talk to the front of house engineer and ask, hey, is this too much? Should I cut some bass? Should I boost more? Do you need anything from my side? Because that's already a good step forward, instead of having the engineer telling you, hey, that's too much bass, the bass sounds like crap, please turn down your treble or please turn down your bass. If you start with a conservative EQ, you can then boost a bit more if it is required. It's always better to hear, hey, could you boost maybe a bit more bass or boost a little bit more mids, more treble, than, hey man, you need to cut that back because the bass is just too boomy. If you start with just a conservative bump, then you can adjust and make the situation work. But like I said, I prefer to go that route because it makes the flow of information with the person running the sound more pleasant than having he or she fight my EQ. Now, in the other scenario where you're playing with your own band, playing original music, or for an artist playing their music, but it's still original material, I see it in this way. The ideal scenario, at least in my experience, is if you can provide the person running the sound with two signals. One being a completely clean DI, and the other one, the one with all your effects, your EQs, maybe it's a mic'd up cabinet. And that helps for these reasons. The clean DI signal is always good as a backup, so if anything happens, you have there a good solid signal that they can use. And they can also use it just for the lows of the room or wherever you're playing. And the one with EQ, or maybe it is the amp that is being mic'd up, that can be placed on top of the DI signal, or it can be just used as a main sound, but they still have the option of balancing between the DI and the other things. Now, for the signal that has all your EQ moves, that probably requires you to send a post EQ signal, because otherwise you're just sending a completely clean raw DI track to front of house, which if you're playing with good technique, definitely works. But depending on the type of music that you're doing, you might need to have certain effects going on. If you're just playing, for example, in a blues band or R&B, soul, or reggae, where you can get away with playing one setting the entire set, probably don't need to do much, and you can definitely just get a completely clean signal and send that, and it's gonna sound fine, or even sound great. But if you're playing songs or in a genre where you need, for example, to add chorus here or there, maybe an octave pedal and distortion, or you name it, any kind of effects that you need to have in your signal for a particular song, then you need to send a post EQ signal to front of house. There's no other way around it. And in those cases, contrary to what I said in the wedding band, corporate event type of gig, here I would go with a bit more aggressive EQing, because you know how the bass is supposed to sound like in that scenario. Ideally, before a show or before a tour, your band did a kind of like a general rehearsal where not only the songs were rehearsed, but also the sound settings and everything, so that when the gig comes, everyone knows what type of EQ they need to do. All the amps, pedals, etc. are set up so that they can send a consistent signal throughout however many shows you're playing. But if you're playing different venues with different sound engineers every time and not the same person, then in those cases I can recommend just to being open about adjusting a bit whatever you have dialed in EQ wise. Rooms are gonna vary in size and how they sound like. There's more or less reverb in some of them. Sound bounces differently, so your EQ settings might work or might have worked perfectly for venue A, but on venue B they're not working, so you need to adjust. It is, however, a great idea having a baseline or a benchmark EQ setting that you can then adjust, say like left or right? So know what you need your bass to sound like in the particular scenario, and then be open to adjusting some settings. Still, here I would always recommend technique first and then worry about the EQ later, because trying to mask inconsistent playing or bad technique, sloppy playing by over EQing is not really the way to go. You want to get a really good signal at the source and then add the EQ on top of that. I hope you guys liked the video. Let me know in the comments how you approach playing a live show. Also, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell to stay up to date with the content that's coming to the channel. As always, thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Take care.